Hello everyone, this is Ben, and this video is not super planned. I'm not real sure what we're going to talk about. I'll just give you the brief rundown right now. I'm going to call this the pro hominem fallacy, as opposed to the typical ad hominem fallacy. Ad hominem means against the man, and so I'll just say pro hominem means for the man. And so, in other words, what I run into sometimes is people who hear me make an argument for the existence of God or a defense of Christianity, and then they say, but they know people who disagree with me. But they have people who disagree with me. Like, for example, one time I gave the Kalam cosmological argument at a church camp, and there were two adults there, and the two adults really objected to the whole thing, and I responded to the objections. Maybe I could have responded to them better, but what was interesting was one of the adults, and this guy was a school teacher who went to like Bible college, and he was like a praise and worship leader. He came to me afterwards and told me that the other adult knew people, who were like highly educated people, and those people could like just refute everything I say, and that was that. And then he followed from that he believed in something called presuppositional apologetics, which apparently there's different versions of that, but the version I'm familiar with is it's where you can't really prove anything, so like you just have to assume that like God exists. But it's not an assumption because everything's an assumption, but I don't know, it's weird. But like I've heard it multiple times. I had a teenage boy with the Kalam argument, and he like seemed almost angry, and he said, but there's people who disagree with you. And I started thinking about it, and I realized like there's a connection here to what these people are saying. They're not just telling me that there's an expert out there. They're not just telling me that like they watched a Richard Dawkins video. I think this is more about the fact that they feel like they have a community that disagrees with me. And it's about the community. And I realize that like there's a connection here to something in a book I say I've read it, but like I've listened to it a couple times as an audiobook because that's how I read books. It's called Why God, and it's written by Rodney Stark, who is a sociologist at Baylor University. And in the book, one of the things he talks about is how religion spreads and how religion changes and shifts, and it's pretty much all about that, and sort of the factors that influence. Sociologists study human social behavior, and what he claims is that evidence, the empirical evidence, and we're talking decades of research. He's got research where he said he was one of the sociologists that broke ground on this, I think back in the 70s or the 60s or something like that. He studied the spread of the Moonies cult in I think Northern California, him and another sociologist. And so that particular religious group, he said like it was having trouble spreading, and it was trying all these different sort of tactics to like convert people. But the tactic that worked the best was when the one woman who was like there, she had been sent from Korea, because this is a Korean religious movement called we call it the Moonies. They call themselves the Unification Church, and she had been sent to America to like spread the church, and she couldn't spread the church until she started like befriending people in her everyday life, and through relationships and stuff, and then like it started spreading. And I've read something similar in a book, a Christian book I read. It was written by Gabe Kinnaman. Gabe Lyons and David Kinnaman, and it's called I can't remember the name of it. the book was about perceptions of Christians that non-Christians have. So it was like it was about outsiders to Christianity and what their perception is and how their perception of Christianity has radically changed. I think it was called Unchristian. Yeah, that's what it was called. But anyway, in that book they said something very similar. Their survey data showed that the most common factor in someone becoming a Christian was that they had a relationship with someone who was a Christian. What they said is it's the most commonly, it's the thing that comes up the most. Now what Rodney Stark was going a little bit further and saying that that's really the determinative factor in someone converting to any religion or any religious conversion, and would include even atheism. And so I started to think, I'm like, okay, so the determining factor in someone converting to a religion is the fact that, this is the way Rodney Stark puts it, the social capital within the religious group, or whatever the group is, outweighs the social capital outside of the group. So social capital, capital is like, you think of capital, it's like the land that you have that you could sell, or a bunch of money you have like just straight cash you have, or assets you have in stocks and bonds. These are capital, just your wealth, basically, something that possesses value. And so, yeah, social capital, people place value on their social relationships. Like, you do a lot to maintain your social relationship. They're important to you. You make sacrifices of money, of food. In some cases, people sacrifice their own personal well-being for the sake of maintaining the social relationship. And it can be sort of selfless in the sense that you're just trying to help somebody, but in many times you're just trying to maintain the friendship. You're not necessarily or the relationship. You're not necessarily trying to do something for that person. You just want to, in general, maintain the friendship, and it's a cost. It's a sacrifice. It doesn't just maintain itself. And we all do it all the time. And so, if we undergo costs to have a thing, then we must place value on that thing. And of course, it kind of makes sense that people would go with their social capital when it comes to religious conversion, that they would let. So in other words, if you have more social capital within a religious group than you do outside of it, that means that the people who are important to you in your life, who you trust, who you listen to, who you identify with, who you go to for advice, those people there's more of those people within the religious group than outside of it. I could see why, yeah, you maybe convert. Although there are examples of people, there are outliers. In other words, this is empirical research, just telling us what happens most of the time. But there's that fluke data, that there's outlier guys. Like, so there's that one story I read in the book, it is by Dallas Willard, and it's called Renovation of the Heart. He tells a story told by a missionary to China, and it's in some province in China, I forget where it is, and this guy was a believer in the traditional religions of his community and his people that had multiple gods. And for some reason, he was already to the point of getting fed up with it, and didn't like all the gods. I don't know what it was, but he converted away from all of that, because he saw a scrap of paper from some Christians that had been around his area, but he apparently had no contact with the Christians and didn't know about Christianity. And so the scrap of paper just said, "Are there many gods?" "No, there's only one." And it was like all it said or something. And that was like the last straw for this guy, and he decided that he only believed in one God. And he had a religious conversion. And so this guy didn't have the social structure. Everything he had as far as his social capital was outside of his religious conversion. So he went against all of his social capital. He went home and smashed all of his idols and said there's only one God. He smashed all of his idols. And so then his daughter got sick and was dying, or what, I don't know how bad it was, but it must have been pretty bad. So, like, everyone in his community, his social capital, told him that, well, this happened because you smashed all your idols, you know. And so he goes to the tallest mountain in the region, and it's like a pretty tall mountain, pretty long climb. And he goes to the top of the mountain and he says, like, some sort of request. He figures that, like, well, the one God, you know, can hear me better if I'm at the top of a mountain, you know. And he asks the one God to, like, heal his daughter. And he comes back down from the mountain and he finds out that, like, his daughter's healed. And so he keeps searching, and eventually he finds the Christians who lived around there that he had found the scrap of paper from, and he becomes like a Christian and a Christian missionary. And so this is an interesting example. Like, there are those outliers in the data. So what Rodney Stark is telling us is sociological data that generally that's what goes on. People convert religiously when the social capital within the religious group outweighs the social capital outside of the religious group. And might I add that that goes for atheism as well, because that's going to play into what I'm talking about with Christian apologetics. So now that we've got all of that, you know, laid out, let's talk a little bit about Christian apologetics. Christian apologetics. Okay. And I'm going to give you what I think is the model for Christian apologetics. The way I think it fits in. And this is an important question. Like, in other words, how does Christian apologetics really have a role within evangelism? Within telling people about Jesus and people hearing the good news of Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ suffering and dying for their sins. How does that fit in with apologetics? Because in apologetics, I might give you proof for God's existence, or respond to criticisms of Christianity. They say Christianity's dumb because this, and this, and I'll say no, it's not because I prove it, blah blah. You know, or I'll give you a proof for God's existence or something like that. How does that fit into evangelism, evangelizing people, sharing the gospel and making disciples of Jesus and teaching them to obey everything, you know? So, like, the first thing is this: in a perfect world, if people didn't believe in Jesus, and you said, hey, you person doesn't believe in Jesus, here is proof for Jesus and Christianity, and then they would say, thank you, now that I know that Christianity is true. People would just all be logical and rational, and they would never be stupid and dumb. And they would, when they were confronted with proof for something, they would just accept it, because it would be irrational to reject proof, right? So, here's the thing. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where people can be poo-poo heads, where people can be hard-headed, and we all experience that every day. We live in a world where people, you have to argue with people about everything, and people are hard-headed about everything, and they won't accept things. So, like, we live in a world where people won't admit that they lost the ball game because it's too important to them that they had to have won it. That they twist the truth and rationalize and claim that, like, the other side cheated or something. That's the real world. That's the world we live in. And the stakes are higher when it's religion. The stakes are much higher because we're not just talking about some outcome of some game, some football game where we're gonna, there'll be another one tomorrow. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about this is your ultimate answer. This is how you're going to answer life's biggest questions. The big questions. Not who wins the game today. Not who's better at this sport today. Or even who's better at this sport for life. We're talking about why does everything exist? What is the point of life and everything? How should we live our everyday life? What are the right choices and the wrong choices on the day-to-day? And ultimately, where will everything end up? Your religion will ultimately determine how you answer those questions. And if you don't have a religion, that's going to have an effect on that too. It's all going to, those are big questions. Those are the biggies. Right? Okay, so what this means is that what I want to do is take a look at the book of Romans. So, in the book of Romans, in the first chapter, Paul says that it's obvious from creation that there's a God, and in other words, God is the creator of the world. And so to tell that the creator exists, you look at the creation. You look at the things God's created to tell that the creator exists. So this is essentially, that kind of makes sense, you know, like you don't look at the creator, but you can look at the creation. We're always looking at the creation. And the arguments for God's existence, you know, that's how they work. Like, well, maybe not the ontological argument. That would be more of an interesting philosophical question. Maybe so, maybe not, I don't know. But the Kalam argument, obviously. The Kalam argument that I gave in my most recent video before this video, if you really want to know, just watch that video, because all it is just the Kalam argument. It's an argument for God's existence on the basis of the existence of the world and the things we experience, basically time. Okay? So this is the thing. If Paul's right, and it's obvious that God exists and that we're under the wrath of God for our sin, and it's obvious, in other words, everybody already knows that, then Paul goes on to say that everyone rejects that. And they reject they as he says, they don't think it's worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. So we refuse to believe what we know to be true, what is obviously true. So in that situation, it's not that there's no lack of proof. You knew it was obviously true. The lack of proof is, it's not like you didn't know. No, Paul's quite clear. That's why everyone is without an argument against God. That's his perspective, because we all know. So we don't think it's worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. And so then we reject God, not because of an intellectual problem, but because we just don't like, we have made, it's a heart issue. Our hearts are set against God. Okay. But then it goes on to say that, like, while we claim to be wise, we really have futile thinking. And we exchange the glory of God for, like, other religions. So, in other words, yes, people don't stay in that position of just, it's obvious that God exists and I just reject that because I've got a bad attitude. That's not where it stays. Rather, it moves. That's like a heart issue. But what we do is we move the heart issue up into our heads so that we can claim to be wise. In other words, we want to say that we're wise for rejecting God. Look at me, how smart I am. I rejected God. Wasn't that a great idea? And so we come up with rationalizations and arguments and things to prove that, like, it was a great idea not to believe in God. It was a great idea to reject God. So this is the stuff that atheists tell us. They have all this stuff built up that it's not that they have a hard heart. It's they have a hard heart that's defended by intellectual confusion. And so this is where Christian apologetics comes in, to remove the intellectual confusion. Okay. Now you may ask me, well, Ben, what's the connection between this social capital stuff and the hard heart intellectual confusion stuff? So, in other words, people, it's obvious God exists. They reject him because of a hard heart, but they move it into an intellectual space where they come up with ways to make themselves feel smart for rejecting God. And I call that intellectual confusion. Or you might call it rationalization. They rationalize it, But it's really shenanigans. I like that word, shenanigans. Shenanigans. So anyway, how does all of that stuff, the hard heart and the intellectual stuff, how does that connect to the social capital stuff? Well, let's think about it. Let's think for a second about it. There's sort of a blurry space in between the two. where they do connect. And I think apologetics has a lot to do with that space. And we need to, I think as Christians, we need to think a lot about this in-between space. And I'll explain what that is. Okay, yeah, people convert religiously on the basis of the fact that when they have more social capital within the religious group than outside of it, they convert. But how do they get the social capital in the first place? You say, well, when they have more of it in this group than outside of it, then they convert. But here's my question. How do they get it in the first place? Well, they have to have relationships with people. You know, they have to be friends with people. You know, to have social capital with someone, it means that you have value for your relationship with them. So, like, you have to be friends with people first. You have to have some sort of relationship. Maybe you're born to those people. Maybe they're your parents. But there has to be some sort of basis for you to get along with that person, to have some sort of friendship and togetherness with that person. So, ask yourself this. What would lead to you just not being friends with somebody? You know, what, in other words, like if you met someone or you were, in other words, like, okay, let's just make it real simple. What would lead to you not being friends with somebody? What would stop you? What would make it so that you're not friends with someone? You know, what would keep you from being somebody's friend? Okay, first of all, if you never meet them. Okay, but let's, you know, of course that's one thing to keep in mind. But there's also the fact that, like, some people you meet and you don't necessarily, and you might even spend a lot of time around them because of some situation or something, but you don't necessarily ever have a lot of social capital with that person. You don't really become friends. And so, why is that? Well, it could be a lot of things. You know, they say women tend to make friendships based on sharing personal details, which is already, if you're like a youth worker like me, you know, that sounds like just a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen. You know, that's how women make friends, sharing private details. Oh, wow, that'll never be a problem, you know. But that's just how it works. I guess that's how women work, and like they know what they're doing because they've been doing it for, you know, 90 bajillion million years. So it's not, just because it's weird to me doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad idea. But what they say is men make friends based on common interests. So like I like to skateboard, so I tend to be friends with other people who skateboard. Now here's the thing, I'm going to give you skateboarding as an example. Yes, I like to skateboard. Yes, I know other people who like to skateboard. But everyone who I skate with won't necessarily become my friend. That's kind of a basis for how it starts. Yeah, I have that common interest with certain people, but some people you get along with and some people you don't. And I started thinking, like, what if someone is insane? You know, I'm a white male as far as I know. And as I understand it, if I remember right, I think it was in the same sociology book from Rodney Stark, the majority of insane people are white males. Or most of the time, most insane people are white males. So, like, this is my point. If someone's crazy, then you probably won't be able to, even if you have a lot in common with them and you like to do a lot of stuff together, and even if you hit it off in a lot of ways, if they're just kooky off, you know, like if they believe in Bigfoot, you know, or they for example, I knew a guy. He was younger than me, but like he believes in werewolves. He just 100% absolutely believed in werewolves, and he believed in the chupacabra. He believed in aliens, and he believed in zombies, but he was very big on vampires are a lie, and there's no such thing as vampires, and he wishes people would stop saying that. And that was his position. You know, and so, like, let's say that this guy and I got along in a whole lot of ways. Like, the werewolf thing would kind of make it hard for me to ever really be homies with that guy. Like, I would never really come to him for advice, or like open up with him, or like really trust this person. Like, if you can't really trust the person, they're not really your friend, because there has to be that mutual trust and respect where, like, I can count on this person when I need them to help with something, and they can count on me. And when we do something together, anything you do together, you both have input, or else you're not really doing it together. And so, if you don't ever really do anything together, then you're not really friends. If you don't see eye to eye on anything or that kind of thing. So, like, in other words, if somebody believed in werewolves, and that was his main thing, he was real sure that he was a werewolf. So, like, if you believe something like that, it's kind of hard to really be friends. I can be his friend, and we can be friends to a point, and I can do backflips to help that guy, and in what way I can. But because of that, like, it's hard for us to. I can never imagine myself really, like, hey, I'm struggling, something that, like, I really am wondering about. I can't imagine myself actually asking him what he thinks, or like having a good laugh together. It's something that you do with someone where you feel like, you get each other, and you really are close, and, like, there's a strong understanding of each other. Like, if I thought he was like the guy who believed in werewolves, I couldn't imagine myself really laughing with the guy. You know what I mean? Because, like, you're kind of opening up about, like, what you really think about stuff when you're laughing together. It's a very honest moment when you laugh at something, and like, I would, if I'm going to, like, it's kind of hard to invite someone in to, like, I guess what I really think about things when that person, believes he's a werewolf. Like, probably what he thinks is funny is not going to be what I think is funny, because what I think is funny is people who believe that they're werewolves. And that's going to be, like, a major problem in the relationship. Okay. So, here's the thing. And this is something I borrowed from another book. William Lane Craig has sort of a apologetics textbook, and it's called Reasonable Faith. And his ministry and his website are by the same name. His YouTube channel is by the same name. But he says that he spent a lot of time getting a lot of degrees in Europe, in Germany and France and in England, mostly Germany and England. But he was kind of in France a lot in the story. I think he kind of went around Europe quite a bit. He said that, like, in Europe, he'd be invited somewhere to give a talk on, proving Christianity true at some university. And he said the students there would think that this was a hoax or like a joke. In other words, they thought of that like he was invited here to give a talk on how werewolves are real. And if someone, like your local university, if someone was invited there as a distinguished professor from some other university to give a talk on how werewolves are real, then you would think it was a joke. And, and like, this is some kind of like gag or goof, or this is some kind of like publicity stunt or something, what is it? You got me again. It's April Fool's, got me again. You've been tricking me, all these years. I can't believe you got me. But like, here's the thing. It's not. What happened when he said they actually phoned the university that he said he was from to confirm that he really was from that university. He says, like, in Europe, that's the norm. Like, if you believe in God, if you call yourself a Christian, that's so uncommon in that culture for someone to really believe in God and really believe Christian. That they look at you like you might as well believe in werewolves or, Bigfoot or, dragons. Like you're just some kind of nut. I think most of the Christians there are like the super liberal type, who might not believe in the resurrection or in God, or like, the resurrection is a metaphor. They might believe in God, but the resurrection is a metaphor, Like, so, like, if they encounter Christians, it's not Christians who, like, 100% believe the Bible. And so they're just flabbergasted that there are people who do, And then I think France has, like, 3% church attendance, and England has, like, 6. And I think, like, most of these people are older, So, here's the thing. What William Lane Craig says is that, like, Christian apologetics can change what he calls the cultural milieu, so that Christianity will be taken seriously as a live option within the pool of options. In other words, like, if you're a person in that culture and you say, like in our culture in America today, and you're a young person, what are you going to grow up, and you're around 11 or 12 or 13, you're going to convert, and you're going to, like, basically not really convert, but it's like a conversion. You're basically going to decide what you think about things because you're old enough to think about it for the first time in your life, and you can't help but make a decision to some degree. And so you're going to decide. You're going to say, like, am I an atheist, or am I a Christian, or some type of Christian, But it's going to fall into some sort of camp of what is in the pool of realistically possibly true options in your culture. So what you're not going to do is if you grow up in America, you're not going to be like, yeah, Krishna, I'm going to believe in Krishna, because that's just seen as wacky nonsense. You're not going to be a Hare Krishna. That's wacky nonsense, in our culture today. If someone came up to you and just said, like, as an American, let's say you're an American and you're a Christian, and someone comes up to you and says, I want you to you should consider following Krishna. You wouldn't really take it that seriously, But if someone comes up to you and tells you that there's no God, in other words, they want you to consider atheism, then that is something you may disagree with, but you take it seriously, because that's seen as a real serious objection to Christianity. Krishna, not really. Hare Krishna, no. But, like, and so that's the point I'm making. That's sort of the bridge. If you understand that, here's my point. You don't become friends with people who are crazy. And if Christian apologetics isn't done, then Christianity will be seen as just crazy. And so people wouldn't make friends with Christians, and then they would never gain social capital within Christianity. And so this is the issue. Again, it's hard heart, okay, and then futile thinking. But I think there's this connection to think about the cultural milieu of what's taken seriously in that culture, because that determines what people will think is crazy and what they don't think is crazy. And then that allows people to make friends or not make friends. And then that will lead to religious conversion. I don't have a problem really with the idea that, like, people convert, religiously on the basis of, their relationships in their life. That's not necessarily, it doesn't really trouble my Christian faith. I mean, like, that's just saying that, like, a big part of why someone became a Christian is because they knew some Christians, and that, what's wrong with that? Like, why is that a bad thing? That God using, Christians to lead people to Christ. And you say, they also could have been relationships with atheists, and it's like, okay, well, that doesn't, that led them to atheism, and it's like, well, okay, whatever. Here's the interesting thing about Christian apologetics. If I do something like Christian apologetics, as a Christian apologist, as someone who goes out and gives arguments for God's existence, if I do that, if I go out and give arguments for God's existence, and so, like, take the Kalam cosmological argument, it refutes atheism, it debunks atheism. If I'm successful with that, then let's imagine me applying that to an atheist. Someone who's an atheist who, like, probably this guy or this girl became an atheist by the time they were 11, 12, 13. 11, 10, 11, 12, something like that. They became an atheist, okay? Well, what did they do to become an atheist? Well, for them, the social capital within atheism outweighed the social capital outside of atheism. That's probably what happened. Or if they converted later in life, maybe when they were a teenager or something. But let's say that I'm interacting with them when they're middle-aged. By the time they're, like, middle-aged, and, let's say they became an atheist at least by the time they were in college. Okay, so they've been an atheist for a long time. And so I come at them with arguments to prove God's existence. The problem is that from their perspective, my arguments are not proving Christianity true. They're proving atheism to be stupid. In other words, I'm not proving my thing. I'm destroying and killing their thing that they believe in. I'm killing atheism. And see, the problem is they converted and probably feel like their belief in atheism is continually reaffirmed because of all the social capital. And if they're middle-aged by this point, they probably have so much social capital in atheism that, like, I come at them with proof for God's existence, actual proof, irrefutable proof, and they say, but my social capital. You see how it works? You see that? They converted, and the religious conversion is built on the social capital, which is normal. The problem is what atheism does, or what apologetics does, is it comes in and it says, all of your friends are crazy. So, like, you shouldn't have been friends. In other words, I'm coming in at an earlier stage in the game and saying, oh, you shouldn't have made friends with them in the first place, because apologetics is dumb. And so then I get back to whatever's going on with them. But it's important to understand that what Paul talks about with the intellectual confusion is completely, according to empirical research and sociological research, like, it's completely tied up in communities. People convert religiously because of communities. They don't do it as islands. That is the exception. That is not the norm. So it's not just, this guy believes this because this is what he thinks, and this guy believes this because what he thinks. People connect it to their communities. It's very tied within communities. And what I'm saying is, there's sort of, in a given culture, there is a pool of live options, things that people think are worth taking seriously. And then there's other stuff that, like, if someone believes that, it's like believing in werewolves or believing in Zeus. And that stuff is, like, just nonsense. And so, if someone believes that stuff, then you would think, well, that guy's just a kook. And you can't really be friends with that guy. You can't really get much social capital with that guy. But then there's other stuff that's taken seriously in your culture, like, Mormon and Baptist and Methodist and atheist and agnostic and something like that. And all of that stuff's serious in the culture. And so apologetics is right in there in this game, because what it's doing is if we Christian apologists can really put the arguments for God's existence out there and make it so that it's very commonly, the arguments for God's existence are very commonly understood, so that everybody knows these arguments, then anyone who still holds to atheism at that point is a kook. They must be. And it will become commonly understood that those atheist people, they can't accept these clearly good arguments for God's existence, then they're kooks. And so the atheists are constantly trying to muddy the waters on these arguments, because if they can't do that, then they'll quickly become kooks. And it'll be hard for them to make friends with, people, because it's like they believe in werewolves. And you have people who believe in werewolves. You have those guys. Like I think I forgot what the guy's name is. He's like he's a libertarian, political pundit, and I can't remember his name, but he always makes the point that like 10% of the U.S. population believes Elvis is still alive, and 8% thinks that if you mail Elvis a letter, Elvis will mail the letter back, which happens to not be true. Okay, so like, this is what they think, and this is, so like, you're always going to have those people who don't, believe what most people believe. But for the most part, someone who thinks Elvis is alive or that Elvis will mail letters back is just seen as a kook. And could you be friends with that person? To a point, as long as that thing didn't come up. But it would be kind of hard for you to be really good buds when there's something like that. Where the person's just off the wall wacky. You know what I mean? So, like, it affects how much social capital you can have. So, like, that's my point. Is, as a Christian apologist, this is what you're running into. You're running into these atheists who will, you come to them with philosophical arguments to prove God's existence, and they come back at you with, but my social capital, but look at all this social capital I have. And it's like, well, what is the deduction from what I'm saying? If what I'm saying is true, then if my arguments succeed in proving that God exists, and you and all of your friends are going to stay atheists, then y'all just became the people who believe in werewolves. I'm not kidding. I know a kid who is dead certain. He's not a kid anymore. He's like 26. Well, no, he's older than that. He's 30 now. But he believes he's a werewolf, and he believed it since he was 16. Okay? Like, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about here with this kid. Okay? I think he told me that it was like 2007. Yeah. But like, his brother believed it, and his grandma, they all believed it, But like, it's like, okay, his grandma told us about the alien encounter and stuff, and like, you're like, okay, like, these people are crazy, man. Like, they, when someone believes something that's just out of touch with reality, then they're crazy, Like, I know one young man who, like, he has difficulty falling to sleep at night because he thinks somebody's going to get him. Like, in other words, insanity is when you lose your grip on reality. That's what it means. So like if you think that like the sun's not going to come up tomorrow, like, and for no good reason, then you're insane. Because it's not something that like might be true. It's just clearly true. But the point is the problem with Christian apologetics is, as it goes along, it becomes more and more obvious. That's the problem. And so it becomes more and more obvious to the apologists, and you fail to realize that you need to explain the arguments better because it's just so obvious to you. But then the other problem is, if you're successful, then it becomes more and more obvious that you're right. And so what happens is you're turning atheists into kooks with your arguments. Is they're going to stay atheists because they've got all this social capital in the atheist group. But at some point, it's like, okay, you never should have been friends with those people in the first place, because those people are they're the nutty people that believe in werewolves. Maybe that's what I'll title this video. Do atheists believe in werewolves? like, this is my point. This is what you run into. I've come to it multiple times. It's like people respond to me with like, but my community. And it's like, well, your community, like, who cares of your community? And like, I'm coming at you with rock solid arguments. If you don't, it's doubtful that you understand them right off the bat. You need to take your time and think about them. If they're good, then, and your community can't accept them, then either your community doesn't understand them, or your community is out of touch with reality. So that's kind of what I wanted to say with this video. There's no real point for me to go on with this because I don't know where I'd go. And that's kind of all the point I had, is like, I think I'm understanding where this is coming from and what's going on here. And where Christian apologetics kind of connects all of this. If Christian apologetics can change the cultural milieu, what it probably will do first is people will take Christianity seriously in the culture. They'll say, well, that's something to be taken seriously. At least they've got good, plausible arguments. But if it's really effective, then the points at which, it probably wouldn't be effective at all points, but the points at which it is would shift the culture to a point where people start saying, well, I can't just, if you reject God completely, you're kooky. So like, for example, on the internet, you rewind the clock a little over 10 years ago, and it was like the heyday of these like the new atheist guys, and so Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Christopher Hitchens, and they were these atheists. And atheism was written large over the internet and over YouTube and that sort of thing. People like Thunderfoot and the Amazing Atheist. I mean, why is he called the Amazing Atheist when he just talks about politics all the time? Because it was atheism, everything, everyone's stupid for, believing in Jesus, believing in God. And, let's see, there were so many. Pat Condell, I think, was one of them. David C. Smalley. Oh my goodness, it felt like there were infinity atheist YouTube channels. And so what seemed to happen to me is William Lane Craig came along, and he gave good arguments and kept defeating atheists in these YouTube debates. And then there was a YouTube channel called Dr. Craig Videos, which was just like videos of him, and it was done in the style that atheists a lot of times like to do. Atheists tend to have a self-congratulatory style about them, where they sort of let you know that they beat you in an argument by saying that they beat you in an argument. And so these videos were cut and spliced of William Lane Craig's debates and his responses, and then it would be things like, it would be cut in, and it would have text from the guy who was making the channel, Dr. Craig Videos guy, and he was anonymous, and it would like have some really jarring remarks. So it would be something like, William Lane Craig absolutely destroyed him here. You can see Hitchens just hiding and running, yada, that kind of thing. And it was just, it went to the level of mockery of atheists, which was like kind of their bread and butter. They just that's what they do, they mock. So he was like communicating to the atheists in their terminology of mockery. And that was a big deal. And then it was like, William Lane Craig debated these guys and defeated them in the debates. And then Richard Dawkins famously wouldn't debate him. And then Lawrence Krauss was sort of like the latecomer to the whole thing, and he was like this guy that tried to jump in on the atheism thing at the very end and debate William Lane Craig. And then he had these debates where he just, he really like was just all he wanted to do was just interrupt and not let the other side talk, and it was clear that like he was just being a big, nasty pants bad guy. And it seemed like around the same time, the movement away from, so you started seeing atheist YouTube channels start focusing on defeating feminism, and then it's defeating social justice warriors, and now it's just defeating communism. And I don't know if they're going to really move. It seems like social justice is a communist term, so I don't know if they're going to move to like just defeating communism. I don't know if they're going to make the final transition, but like it's this weird like conservative atheists, and it started with feminism, and then it was and so that's morphed and changed. But that movement seemed to really start with when Richard Dawkins wouldn't debate William Lane Craig, and that was when the heyday was of the Dr. Craig videos, because like he would make these videos, showcasing things from the other debates, and then like this debate, Richard Dawkins like ran and hid with his tail between his legs and said that William Lane Craig wasn't he said that like William Lane Craig's not like high enough, like he's not high ranking enough or something to debate me. And it's like, oh wow, that was amazingly lame excuse. So like here's my point. I think that's what happens is because of that, Christianity became seen as realistically like something that needs to be taken seriously, as seriously some real possibility. Like if you think of these worldviews as a contest, then some warriors in the contest are written off as a joke, and some warriors are taken as serious adversaries that might be able to win. And Christianity moved into that camp. I really think it did, at least in that world and that community around that time. And so you fast forward to today, and you see debates between, on the one hand, you've got Sam Harris, who's this older, religion's dumb, get rid of religion. And on the other hand, you've got like Eric Weinstein and Jordan Peterson, and they're like trying to find some kind of way to not be Christian and not embrace religion, but not get rid of religion. And like, what's going on here? Why is this the big issue today? I don't know. Could it be the apologetics made people step back and say, oh, Christianity needs to be taken more seriously. We don't need to just drop it like a bad habit. It's not crazy. It's not stupid. And their whole thing is like, Christianity gave us our moral values, and like we're losing our moral anchor if we just toss it out the window. And that's their debate they're having, with Sam Harris. And it's like, wow. Things have moved a lot. That's even taken seriously. Because like, as I understand it, neither of these guys claim to be Christian. None of the people, claim to be Christian, but like, the thing is, the moral argument for God's existence, for example, is not that complicated, and it has to be having an effect on people, even if they don't admit it. It has to. And that's just my point. You move things with Christian apologetics, you adjust that cultural milieu to a point where, like what William Lane Craig says, is Christianity is taken seriously. But if you move things with apologetics far enough, then atheism begins to look more and more and more like believing in werewolves, where it's just stupid. You're just an idiot if you're an atheist. I don't know how else to put it. Like, if someone believes in werewolves, he's an idiot. Because in other words, like, he's out of touch with reality. He's lost it. His marbles, whatever it is you play with where you're from, he's lost them. And so like, what do you do with a guy like that? Well, you care for him and you try to be there for him, but you can't really be homies with that dude. You're not going to call him up on when you're like, hey man, you want to go see a movie, my crazy friend? Like, it's just going to be different with your crazy friend. It's kind of like having a mentally handicapped friend. There comes a point, there's only so much camaraderie you can have with that guy. You know, and like, that's the threat of Christian apologetics. It threatens to kill their social capital. And they want to defend it because you're coming after their relationships. And so, this is my, this connects to atheism. Now, it connects quite clearly with Islam or something like that. So, like with Muslims, you literally will, it's part of the religion that your family has to ostracize you if you, you know, become a Christian. Or if you leave Islam, then the penalty is death. So like, and, so it's like written into the religion in those cases. But my point is this. Even with atheism that doesn't really have a written, document, it's not really a religion. It's just the lack of a belief in a thing. You still have a lot of social capital invested in this. And so, it's like those memes say, but my social capital. You know what I mean? But all my friends, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, all your friends are. That's what I just, if my argument works, then all of your friends were kooks. Or if they weren't aware of these good arguments for God's existence, well, now that they are, they're going to be seen as kooks by anyone who's a rational, reasonable person. And if they don't, convert over, but it's going to be hard for them to convert over. So I've just turned, they're probably not going to convert over. That's going to be hard. So what did I just do? I turned them all into kooks. So anyway, I've rambled on long enough about this. Hopefully I've driven the point home about the effect Christian apologetics has on the culture and how people convert religiously as a social phenomenon. So there you have it. I hope we got somewhere with this video. And thank you for your time.